Hunter Lowry. I am the coordinator of the Louisiana Survivors for Reform Coalition. We are co-hosting this event alongside Crime Survivors NOLA, who provides a physical book and online resource guide for survivors of violence in Greater New Orleans. We also have LA Repeal, which is a coalition of community members, activists, faith leaders, and everyday people organizing to end the death penalty in Louisiana. And Louisiana Survivors for Reform is a coalition of crime survivors, homicide victims' families, and organizations creating change in the criminal justice system. So without further ado, I will introduce Sister Helen. Sister Helen Prejean is known around the world for her tireless work against the death penalty. She has been instrumental in sparking national dialogue on capital punishment and in shaping the Catholic Church's vigorous opposition to all executions.
With Rose Preston, who's going to be with us and talk to us, and Melissa Bays, and Jamie Inglis, and Flozell Daniels, people who have all been in the crucible of suffering. And my whole desire is for you to get your voices out, you to get your stories out, because that's where the life is, that's where the healing is. And it is the anniversary today, April 5th, early in the morning, right after midnight, when Patrick Saunier was executed, and I was there. And I witnessed his killing, and it changed my life. I spend my life because when all we can think of is violence, punishing with violence, throwing lives away, we can have no healing. So now here's Rose Preston, founder of Crime Survivors NOLA. Rose's husband, James, and his mother were murdered in 2003.
I was just in the dark. I just did not understand what was going on. My brain was in trauma. And I felt like I was in the shadows of this case. It wasn't about me. It was about what the state decided they were going to do. So I felt very voiceless in the process. I was turned on to a chaplain, an NOPD chaplain. She was the one who turned me on to grief and support groups. And that was just so radically helpful for me, because I finally was in a room with people who knew what I was going through. I didn't feel alone in the process. That for me was a real turning point, was coming across that, because then you find community, then you find people who care, who are responsive. And that was the thing that I really needed. And I was like caught up in my own vengeance fantasies. I think when you feel just this outrage of loss from violence, it's a normal response to have that. We go through phases when you're going through trauma. There are three needs of the griever: to find the words for the loss, to say the words aloud, and to know the words have been heard. And I think that's just, the sense of being in the shadows is just so devastating. Time is a healer. It does. I mean, there's an eventual acceptance that this is your new reality.
Yeah.
But, one of the words that sticks in my craw a little bit is when people go, "Have you found closure?" It's like, that just isn't part of the deal. My husband and I were not in favor of the death penalty, but when something like this happens to you personally, it's like, well, this is different in this situation. You can't help that. It's a normal part of it. But I think, if you respond in that anger, you're just going to be in the loop. And like you said, you are just, you're motivated by that. It'll eat you up. I mean, I learned about restorative justice as a way of, like, rather than just going, "I want my pound of flesh from you," it's really the thing that I think a lot of survivors talk about, is trying to understand the why did this happen? And, there's never going to be a satisfactory answer to that. But I think, that is so important for survivors to feel like they aren't being expected to, get over it and move on. It's like grief to me as an expression of love. Where there's been great love, there will be great grief. in its loss. And to me, that really was just, yes, that is what it is. Grief is a reflection of loss that involves somehow our love, something that we love very much.
You are both a homicide victim survivor and a death row family member. Your father, James Baldwin, was convicted and sentenced to death in 1994. He murdered your mother, Elizabeth Baldwin, and 3 other men.
I was 6 when this happened between my parents. So I had to make a decision according to all the adults, what I felt about the death penalty, how I felt about both of my parents, and really how I felt like, I guess I had to choose a side. Everyone decided I had chose a side if I continued having anything to do with my dad. It's hard to conceptualize that both of your parents are gone forever, no matter what happens. They're gone. And so I was just like, if he's not allowed to come home, then give him a life sentence. And my sister was just like, I would just want my dad to come home. With my dad passing away in 2020, well, my daughter visited my dad for 5 years before COVID shut Angola down. Through my daughter, I saw him come back to life. And to see a man do that while he's on death row in stage 5 renal failure, he had multiple amputations at the end of his life. Like being able to see the humanity inside Angola. And one day we were just standing in the visit line, and she was like, man, a lot of people live where Papa lives. And I realized at that moment, we didn't have to survive what had happened. There just wasn't, everyone was grieving so much, they forgot, I think, that we were there watching. And we heard all of it and knew, I knew what was going on very clearly. I think the hardest part of it, though, is that everyone immediately forgot that we had lost our mother. And then we lost her whole side of the family. And then we lost all the people that used to be close to us because, my grandma was advocating for her son's life. Well, this is DeSoto Parish, and you don't do that here. Every person that is convicted or even accused of murder is condemned, even your family is as well. And no one was ever like, hey, those 2 children have done nothing. The children of the men that my father killed, they were treated as victims.
I, of course, as spiritual advisor to people on death row, very often with murder victims' families, it's like a seesaw. And if you're not against the death penalty, if you see dignity in them, you must be against us. What do you think? What's going on there?
We have lost a lot of compassion as a nation, as a people. I've just always been proud to be my dad's daughter. Instead of ever being a victim of anything, I've just survived constantly. And he's no longer here for me to have to protect him. And I can say what I want to say now without any repercussions against him. Like, Angola can't do anything about what I say now. And it's so freeing to be rid of that place. I had to survive. I feel like I walked with him all 26 years. And I know I have. And I felt like sometimes we would be disconnected and he would be like, you don't know how it feels to be on death row. But I do. I do know how it feels. I haven't always had words, mainly because it's hard for someone to be able to relate to you when you are still part of someone on death row's life after they've murdered one of your family members. But we had a lot of talks, him and I, because death row gives you nothing but time. And I've probably sat him down probably 10 times in my life and talked to him and had him tell me exactly what happened over and over again. Angola wasn't just a place we went once a month. It was a large part of our life. I'm sure they're really overjoyed to not have to hear from me anymore. I might call up for old time's sake, but we never had counseling. We just went back to our normal lives. Like, we went back to school after they sentenced him to death. We never had trauma counseling or grief counseling of any sort. It was like everyone felt everyone that was bad was gone, so we were safe. That did not happen because my sister fell to genetics, and when addiction runs a large part of both sides of your family, without me, because I was the only person that was never going to turn my back on him, that he wouldn't have made it. And if it wouldn't have been for him calling me, and then he called every day for the rest of his life. But if it would, we survived together. We kind of held each other up. I don't know that children are allowed to make choices. So I think we need to give grace to children of people on death row. And I'd rather just see death row gone altogether, but to remember that they have children as well, and their lives stopped that day too.
You really give us a lot of courage, Jamie, and and they've shuttered pretty much the killing chamber. We haven't had an execution in 15 years, but not killing people. Okay, Melissa, where's your face? Melissa Bays is a nurse, an advocate for violence prevention, working with a group called Change. She's a mother in West Baton Rouge who lost her son Harold Jr. to gun violence in 2018.
I love his little smile, and like even when he was little, and he was very truthful. One time I recall the kids telling him, boy, stop acting like a baby telling your mama I love you.
Oh,
And
wow.
he said, I could tell my mama I love her. That's my mama. I love my mama. And so nobody never did stop him from saying that. And up until the night Harold left here, say, good night, old lady, I'll be back. Or I love you. And every morning it was good morning, ma, I love you, or good night, ma, I love you.
Right.
I feel the time and the money and the energy they spend on the death penalty and like other stuff, that they could handle other cases more better. That's just as important as those type cases. Harold just had a good heart, and I just feel he shouldn't have left like that. It's like I lost part of me losing him, and I just felt if the police just take more time into handling people cases and stop worrying about death penalty and all kind of other stuff, and put more focus on other type cases, because my baby was just as important. And another thing that kind of like worried me with the death penalty, I have an oldest son, and one night the transformer blew up. The people came, they said, oh, I saw that boy. Guess where my son was? He was in Cleveland, Ohio with his daddy. And they say he blowed the transformers up, everything went black. So it's a lot of times you could be doing the death penalty on someone that really didn't even do that crime. Just God forbid somebody go get the death penalty and you be done killed that person and then find out later that's really not the person. But you taking all this time, money, and energy, to take somebody's life. And I feel nobody should judge anybody but God.
You're going to be able to decide out all the murders, what's the worst of the worst. Who knows what that means? They give complete discretionary power up to the DA and prosecutors to go for death or not. If you don't care about the victim as much, you're not going to put a lot of energy into it. And
when I tell you, it's like our chain is broken. Harold was part of our chain that's going to link again in another life. And I've been in the hospital in the medical field forever. So much you see people getting, shot, killed, or whatever. And I never felt it until once it hit home, it was a totally different ball game. So now at the hospital and they asked me when you're coming back, but I'm just not ready for that because certain stuff trigger me so much with him. Because
Yeah.
I really miss him. And I'm
Uh,
trying to go back to life. God knows I am. And I met the guy whose son they said killed my son. I met his father during that time, and everybody asked me, "Well, how can you talk to his daddy?" But I tell them I met the daddy like a week later because at first I didn't want to do it, and
yeah.
then everybody was saying, "How can you talk to the daddy?" But my husband never did want to talk to the guy daddy.
Yeah.
But I was saying if he's the type of parent I was with my kids,
Yeah.
I can't fault the daddy for it. And the daddy is the one who connected me with the change group, the boy daddy.
You know, I wrote this book called Dead Man Walking, and the hero of the book is the father. Son David was murdered. The way he described it to me, that he just said that I was angry all the time and I was losing who I was. But he just said, they killed my boy, but I'm not going to let them kill me. The killer of David, his son, the mama,
Okay.
the mama whose son had killed lived in this little town, and the townspeople hated her. And he went to visit her, and he brought her a basket of fruit, and he said, Miss Sonia, I'm a parent just like you, and as parents, we never really know what our kids might do, and I just want you to know I don't blame you for what happened. Flozell Daniels, he's the president and chief executive of Foundation for Louisiana. His 20-year-old son, Louis, was murdered in 2016.
He was a delightful boy, fat, chubby cheeks, and an easy smile. He called me Pops. And he was smart, bilingual, and well traveled and thoughtful. We had no idea that at the age of 20 we would get that phone call. No one ever tells you that there's a likelihood that you may lose them and the hole it will create in your heart and in your life. It is 6 years later, still unfathomable. It has been really the worst kind of life lesson. In so many ways has reframed my faith and my understanding of humanity. As someone who was also raised in the church, Black Baptist family, that it really tested my faith, my ability to understand whether humanity had the ability to show up for each other. Since Katrina, on average 150 murders a year. Each of these lovely, wonderful humans has dozens of people who love. And so the impact is huge. I can't go anywhere in the city without meeting someone who has a story to tell about their loss. And as you've heard, how the system and society has a lot of work to do. Part of what we are interested in from that perspective, Sister Helen, is investing in ways that make sure people in community get heard and seen, and that people who have control of systems, elected officials, appointed officials, and the like, understand that we have a different vision for safety. My son was not made safe by Louisiana being the most incarcerated place in the world. We think the guy who committed this crime, we think we know who he is. And when we looked into his background, he'd been in and out of the system, a system that didn't serve him well either. Why is it that a country, that a state, that a city who spends so much money and time on so-called public safety, why are we one of the least safe places in the world, especially for Black and Brown folk? That the systems that say they care about public safety, in fact, do not care about public safety. These are important questions for people of faith. These are important questions for people who care about fairness and decency. And people really want to engage in the tough part of this work. They don't want to just lock them up and throw away the key, or heaven forbid, kill someone on behalf of community. It's the craziest thing I've ever heard of, except it is the very value that this country was built on. If you can imagine in your mind a grid where all these systems actually are interconnected.
Right.
And so you can't really talk about one
Right.
without talking about, so you'll never have a fair and well operating education system, a
Right.
public system, as long as you have an evil and greedy criminal legal system. Here we are in 2022 with systems that are driven by deep, deep personal and systemic racism.
Yes.
They are driven by a deep bias and dislike for low wealth and poor people. This is hard stuff to talk about. There is a way for us to reimagine our lives. And the first place we have to start is in the worst case scenario, we have to stop killing people for the so-called sake of community, and then saying that we are trying to stop violence when we are committing state violence. It doesn't make sense. It's not logical. It is not moral. It fits none of the standards of the so-called Bible Belt
Right.
because it sends the signal that our answer to violence is more violence.
We spent $280 million in the capital punishment system in the last 15 years to get one execution.
Mm-hmm.
Pumping money into this killing process, which is the state imitating the worst possible human behavior and imitating what they do. And
That's
then
right.
claiming for victims' families, if they wait 15 to 20 years, they get to watch. And that's supposed to heal them.
Yeah, Sister Helen, I sit on the state's public defender board where we get a chance we try to have at least a fighting chance to make sure people have representation. It costs us between $10 and $12 million a year to represent death row cases. And if we took that off the table, those resources could be invested somewhere else. The folks on this call are the real answer. The people who are going to advocate and push for accountability consistently. This is the session where we can push through this bill.
People are good, but you got to wake them up and give them a chance. When they wake up, we can make change. And I'm hopeful.
But Sister Helen, I'm hopeful too. And what it does is it gives us a chance to unwind generations of narrative that we've been fed.
Really?
That has made us believe that this system is designed to keep us safe. And for those of us who've gone through the grief counseling, the years of therapy, the years of calling out from work because I couldn't get off the floor in the morning, all the things that this loss takes from you. And then you realize the system is interested in taking more from you. Imagine, Sister Helen, Rose, and Jamie, and Melissa, imagine if we could get away from fear-based decisions and move to love-based decisions.
There you go.
Love is going to save us. It is going to strengthen us. It is going to give us the opportunity to deal with restorative justice and other really tough things and tough conversations and tough corners that we have to turn.
You know what? Hope's an active verb. You got to practice it in order to have it, because otherwise you're standing on the side and you're just paralyzed. So thank you.
That's right.
Thank you for everybody sharing with us.
Again, thank you so much to Rose and Jamie and Melissa and Flozell and you, Sister Helen. This was a really, really incredible and moving event, and so honored to share space with y'all.